The tension inside the House Oversight Committee room was the kind that could be felt in the chest, a still, heavy anticipation that weighed down on everyone present. The scent of polished wood mingled with the faint ozone of camera equipment, and the room was packed to capacity. Reporters filled the back rows. Staffers lined the walls. Even the aides were unusually quiet. At the center of it all sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Her deep purple blazer was an intentional choice, striking but professional. She sat poised at the committee bench, posture straight, eyes locked on the man across the room. Calm, unflinching, waiting. That man was Kash Patel, 43 years old and seasoned in Washington's corridors of power. A former Defense Department official, he wore a navy suit so sharp it looked custom-tailored, and a red silk tie that sat perfectly centered beneath his jaw. Patel was known for his composure and confidence, especially in high-stakes environments like this one. He leaned forward into the microphone with a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "With all due respect, Congresswoman," he said smoothly, "you're new to Washington. You don't understand how national security works." The tone wasn't just dismissive, it was surgical. A public belittling delivered with the calculated restraint of someone who'd used this playbook before. "I've served at the highest levels of government while you were still figuring out how Congress operates." A few Republican committee members nodded in silent approval. Patel, sensing his advantage, pressed further. "I've briefed presidents. I've managed classified operations. I've protected this nation while politicians played games," he said, voice rising just slightly for effect. "So forgive me if I don't think a freshman representative should be questioning my judgment or my loyalty to this country." The room stilled. The kind of stillness that precedes a storm. Staffers stopped typing. Reporters lowered their pens and stared. The committee chairman began to lean into his microphone, clearly ready to intervene before the exchange escalated. But Crockett didn't flinch. She simply raised one hand slightly, barely perceptible, but full of authority. She had this. The camera operators at C-SPAN seemed to sense it too. One slowly zoomed in, capturing her composed expression in stunning clarity. Crockett didn't look angry. She didn't look rattled. In fact, she looked almost serene. Those who knew her well, though, recognized that look. It wasn't serenity, it was precision. It was the focused calm of a trial attorney who had just heard exactly what she needed from a hostile witness. Kash Patel leaned back a little, comfortable in his chair, that same smug smile still faintly present. This wasn't new to him. He'd used this tactic many times, aggressively asserting his national security credentials, casting oversight as political theater, and painting questioners as naive. More often than not, it worked. When he was challenged in the past, his opponents either grew defensive and emotional, playing right into his narrative, or backed down altogether, intimidated by his resume and tone. But something about Jasmine Crockett, the way her gaze never wavered, the way she hadn't scribbled a single note during his monologue, suggested this wasn't going to play out the way he expected. In the gallery, a veteran journalist shifted forward in his seat. Years of covering Capitol Hill had taught him to recognize turning points. And something about the way Congresswoman Crockett had clasped her hands on the table, pen now set aside, told him this was one of those moments. The context? A high-stakes House Oversight Committee hearing, convened to investigate allegations surrounding the mishandling of classified documents and potential obstruction of justice. The implications were serious, potentially criminal. Patel had been called as a key witness due to his close involvement with the former administration and his tenure in top-tier intelligence positions. He had come prepared. For the first hour of the hearing, he had fielded questions effortlessly. Republicans offered softballs, giving him space to narrate long-winded stories about his service. Democrats had pressed him harder, probing inconsistencies, but Patel had deflected with practiced ease, at times evading questions entirely or casting them as partisan distractions. "I've dedicated my life to protecting American interests," he repeated more than once. "My record speaks for itself." Then it was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's turn. Like Patel, she was 43. But her path to power had been entirely different. Before entering Congress, She had spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney and later served in the Texas state legislature. Known for her incisive legal mind and refusal to be bullied, she had quickly developed a reputation in Washington as someone who didn't come to hearings to make speeches. She came prepared. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, adjusting her microphone. "Mr. Patel, I appreciate your appearance today." Patel nodded, posture stiff, bracing himself. He'd watched clips of her previous hearings. He knew she was sharp. He also knew she wouldn't be serving him the easy questions. "I'd like to begin with your statements regarding the handling of classified documents," Crockett said evenly. "In your interview with Fox News on September 12th, you claimed that certain documents had been properly declassified through the appropriate channels. Is that correct?" "Yes," Patel said confidently. "That's accurate. I was involved in the declassification process myself. Everything was done by the book." "And yet," Crockett said, now holding up a transcript, "when asked about those same documents under oath during your deposition last year, you stated you had no direct knowledge of any declassification procedures being followed." She looked directly at him. "Those are your exact words." Patel shifted. "Context matters, Congresswoman. Those were different circumstances." "Different circumstances?" she repeated slowly. "So the truth changes depending on where you're speaking and who's listening?" There was a stir among Democratic members. One journalist in the gallery began scribbling furiously. "That's not what I said," Patel said, his tone sharpening. "You're twisting my words. This is exactly the kind of political grandstanding the American people are tired of." Crockett didn't blink. "I'm simply quoting your own statements, Mr. Patel. In one forum, you claimed direct involvement. Under oath, you claimed no knowledge. Both cannot be true." Patel leaned forward, voice tight. "Congresswoman, these are complex national security matters. With all due respect, you've been in Congress for what, a year? I've served my country in the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, and the intelligence community." He gestured with one hand, dismissively. "I understand you're trying to make a name for yourself, but these gotcha questions only demonstrate your inexperience with how classified information actually works." Republican members smirked. The chairman looked toward the clock, clearly wishing the moment would pass. Patel continued, more forceful now. "I don't expect you to understand the nuances of classified information handling. That comes with experience you simply don't have." A murmur passed through the room. It was subtle but unmistakable. Patel had just crossed a line. It wasn't just disagreement anymore. It was condescension, blatant and personal. Crockett still didn't flinch. Those who knew her noticed it, a subtle raise of the eyebrow. Patel. She had been waiting for this. The air in the hearing room had turned from tense to electric. After Jasmine Crockett's initial round of questioning had exposed the first major crack in Kash Patel's carefully rehearsed narrative, the atmosphere shifted. What had begun as yet another oversight committee session had now transformed into something different, something consequential. Reporters who had come expecting dry bureaucratic exchanges now found themselves on high alert. The room seemed to lean inward as Crockett adjusted the mic again and flipped through her notes with the same unhurried precision of a seasoned trial attorney ready to resume cross-examination. Patel, still seated across from her, had begun showing signs of discomfort. The dismissive smirk that had accompanied his earlier rebukes was slowly fading, replaced by something more rigid, tense shoulders, a tightening jaw, and eyes that flicked nervously toward his allies on the committee. "Mr. Patel," Crockett said evenly, "let's clarify something basic before we move on." He didn't respond at first, so she continued. "You previously stated that you personally ensured proper declassification of documents through the appropriate legal channels, correct?" Patel leaned into the mic, a flicker of confidence returning. "Yes. As I've said, I was involved in the process." "That's accurate." Crockett nodded. "And yet, during your sworn deposition last year, you stated, and I quote, 'I was not personally aware of any formal declassification procedures being followed.'" She held up the transcript like a piece of evidence in a courtroom. Patel shifted in his seat again. "Context matters, Congresswoman," he said. Those were two entirely different scenarios. Different scenarios, Crockett repeated slowly, letting the phrase hang for effect. So, in one context, you were personally involved. And in another, you weren't aware of anything being done at all. That's not what I said, Patel snapped, voice sharper now. You're twisting my words. I'm quoting your words, Crockett responded, not missing a beat. Verbatim. You said them on record. Twice. Under very different circumstances. The murmurs in the gallery returned. More heads turned. A reporter from the New York Times was already typing furiously. Patel tried to recover. These are national security matters, he said. It's not unusual for statements to sound different when you're discussing classified operations in different forums. Mr. Patel, Crockett said, her voice growing more direct, I'm not here to discuss how something sounds. I'm asking you about what is true. Patel opened his mouth but didn't speak immediately. Let me make it even simpler, Crockett said, pulling out another document. On June 3rd, you signed a certification stating that all classified documents had been returned. Yet, we now know, factually, that was not the case. Do you deny signing that certification? Patel hesitated. No, I signed it. And was that statement true at the time you signed it? I believed it was true, based on the information I had, he said, but his voice cracked just slightly on the last few words. So, Crockett continued, you signed a legal certification without verifying that the information was accurate? That's not what It's a yes or no question, Mr. Patel. There was a pause. A long one. I did not personally verify every box, he admitted finally. Crockett let the admission breathe. She leaned forward now, her posture still calm, but her tone sharpened ever so slightly. Mr. Patel, you've leaned heavily on your experience today. On your resume. You've reminded us, more than once, that you've worked in the Defense Department, on the National Security Council, in the intelligence community. He nodded. Yes, I have. Then you must also know that handling of classified materials is not just a matter of protocol. It's a matter of law. And that the legal burden doesn't disappear because you assumed someone else handled it properly. Across the room, a former federal prosecutor watching the hearing from his laptop nodded in silent approval. Let's talk about storage, Crockett continued. Because you keep emphasizing how secure everything was. But the facts tell a different story. According to evidence submitted to this committee, documents were found in unsecured areas, a ballroom, a bathroom, even in a shower. Patel exhaled loudly, a gesture of frustration. Those characterizations are based on misleading media narratives. The facilities in question were protected by the Secret Service. The Secret Service protects people, not documents, Crockett responded instantly. You know that. You were in the intelligence community. That's not a matter of opinion, it's a jurisdictional fact. For the first time, Patel didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened. You're deliberately mischaracterizing the security measures that were in place, he said finally, but his voice lacked the previous sharpness. Crockett shook her head slightly. I'm characterizing them based on photos, sworn statements, and inventory logs, Mr. Patel. Not spin. In the gallery, a retired intelligence officer was seen quietly mouthing, she's right. Patel tried to deflect again. Look, these hearings have become political theater. I served to protect this nation, not to play political games. So did the law, Crockett replied. And the law isn't a game. You either followed it, or you didn't. Another Democratic member turned slightly to whisper to a colleague, she's not letting go. He doesn't have an exit. Trying one more time, Patel went back to his earlier tactic. With all due respect, Congresswoman, you've been in Washington for, what, a year? I've spent decades making real decisions that impact national security. You're asking questions without understanding the full picture. The room tensed again. There was the same line from earlier. The same attempt to condescend his way out of scrutiny. This time, Crockett didn't immediately respond. She took her time. Looked him straight in the eye. You've mentioned my time in Washington more than once today, Mr. Patel. As if the length of time spent in this town is a substitute for facts or legal consistency. She flipped a page in her notes. I spent 15 years in courtrooms before I ever set foot in this one. And I've cross-examined plenty of witnesses who tried the same tactics you're using now: avoid the question, deflect with authority, then insult the questioner. Her voice was calm, unshakable. And you know what I've learned from those years, Mr. Patel? She leaned in just slightly. They only start doing that when the truth doesn't work anymore. Patel froze. The room was silent once more. And the feeling in the air had changed again. No longer tense. No longer electric. Now it felt inevitable. As Jasmine Crockett's final words echoed through the chamber, calm, deliberate, and devastating, an almost sacred silence overtook the room. It was the kind of silence that follows a turning point, where every person present feels the weight of a shift too significant to ignore. For 5 long seconds, nobody moved. No papers rustled. No whispers traded. Even the C-SPAN crew held steady, cameras locked in place, capturing a freeze frame of a man unmoored. And then, from the back of the room, a voice barely louder than a breath whispered, "Oh my God." The words were quiet, but unmistakable. In that suspended moment, everyone heard them. Crockett had not raised her voice. She had not resorted to the theatrics often seen in these kinds of hearings. She had simply laid out the facts, offered the contradictions, and delivered her final line with the certainty of someone who had not only done her homework, but who deeply understood the responsibility she carried. On the witness stand, Kash Patel remained still, his expression hollow. The confidence that had once bordered on arrogance, the mocking dismissiveness with which he had addressed the Congresswoman, had completely vanished. His mouth hung slightly open, his gaze unfocused. The transformation was unmistakable. The confident former government official had become a man suddenly aware that he no longer had control of the room or the narrative. Chairman Thompson, visibly uncertain how to proceed after such a thunderous moment of silence, cleared his throat and leaned into the mic. "Mr. Patel, would you like to respond to the Congresswoman's observation?" Patel blinked, took a shaky breath, and reached for the glass of water in front of him. The movement, though small, was picked up instantly by the cameras. The trembling in his hand caused the water inside to ripple, a subtle detail, but one that would later be slowed down, zoomed in, and analyzed across television panels and online platforms. "I resent the implication," he said at last, his voice softer, lacking its previous force. "I have never committed perjury. I have served this country faithfully." But the impact of Crockett's statement had already settled into the air, irreversible and absolute. No one rushed to defend him. The committee, now fully engaged, sat up straighter, more attentive. Even those who had seemed disengaged earlier, checking phones, scrolling through notes, were now locked in, aware they had just witnessed a moment that would be talked about long after the hearing concluded. Crockett remained composed. She didn't gloat. She didn't press further. Her point had been made, effectively, and with a precision that spoke louder than any additional words. "This isn't about your patriotism or your service record," she said calmly. "It's about accountability and truth. No one, regardless of position or connections, is above the law. That principle is what truly protects our national security." She gestured subtly to the printed testimony before her, then continued, her tone unwavering. "The evidence shows a pattern of contradictory statements that cannot be reconciled. Not because of different contexts or interpretations, but because they fundamentally conflict with each other." Patel attempted to interrupt, perhaps to reclaim some control, but Crockett didn't allow it. "Congresswoman, you're making serious accusations based on a flawed. I'm making observations based on your own words," she said, cutting in smoothly but firmly. "Words you said under oath in one setting and contradicted in another. That's not my interpretation. That's what happened." The tension in the room rose. A low murmur traveled among the members and audience alike. What had started as a standard oversight hearing had evolved into something else, something far more consequential. Crockett wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Patel. "Your repeated attempts to dismiss my questions by referencing my experience, rather than addressing the substance of your own contradictory statements, only reinforces the impression that you cannot reconcile them." Then came the line that would be quoted, clipped, and circulated endlessly. The truth doesn't require elaborate explanations or attacks on the questioner, Mr. Patel. The truth stands on its own. To some, it felt like a closing argument. To others, a warning. Either way, it landed with the clarity of a gavel drop. A Democratic member on the far end of the dais was heard whispering to a colleague, "She's incredible." Sensing the pressure mounting on Patel, the chairman stepped in, voice measured but firm. "The Congresswoman's time has expired." "I yield back," Crockett said with quiet finality, closing her folder with care. But the moment had already exploded beyond the confines of her 5-minute window. Staffers were seen hurrying from the room, phones in hand, undoubtedly relaying what they had just witnessed. Journalists leaned toward one another, exchanging silent looks as they typed feverishly. Within the hour, the footage was online. Clips of the exchange flooded social media platforms. One headline read, "Crockett destroys Patel with one sentence." Another, "Former DOJ official speechless under cross from freshman Congresswoman." News anchors dissected the moment frame by frame, bringing in legal analysts to weigh in on the implications. "What we witnessed today was a masterclass in congressional questioning," said Alicia Montgomery, a former federal prosecutor, on a major cable network. She methodically established the contradictions, gave him multiple opportunities to explain, and only when he chose to attack her qualifications instead of answering the question did she deliver the knockout line. Another analyst nodded. What made it so effective was that she didn't overplay it. She wasn't performing. She just laid down the facts, and when the facts weren't answered, she let them speak for themselves. By evening, the clip had been viewed more than 10 million times. People from across the political spectrum were sharing it, quoting it, drawing inspiration from it. "Watching Representative Crockett refuse to be bullied gave me courage to speak up in my own workplace," one woman posted, a comment that was shared thousands of times. A high school debate coach in Ohio used the clip the very next morning. "Watch how she never raises her voice," he told his students. "She lets the contradiction do the work." Law schools across the country began discussing it in class. Professors praised the way she built her argument, step by step, then let the witness collapse under the weight of his own words. 3 days later, the Department of Justice issued a short but impactful statement. It was formally reviewing Patel's testimony for inconsistencies with prior sworn statements. The news hit Washington like a thunderclap. The story dominated front pages. Patel canceled all upcoming interviews. A scheduled book deal was quietly shelved. Sources close to him described him as reeling. "He thought he could bulldoze through this hearing like he always does," said one former colleague. "He wasn't ready for someone like Crockett." Crockett, meanwhile, stayed grounded. She declined multiple requests for interviews and continued her regular congressional schedule. At a town hall event in her district, she was met with applause and standing ovations, but she quickly redirected attention away from herself. "This isn't about me or Mr. Patel," she said to the crowd. "It's about a fundamental American value, that no one is above the law, no matter how powerful their connections or impressive their resume." She paused briefly, then added, "When I was a trial attorney, I learned that the truth has a certain clarity to it. Lies require constant maintenance, remembering which version you told to whom, constructing elaborate explanations for inconsistencies. The truth simply is." The audience nodded, many recording her words on their phones. A week later, an older man approached her at a public meet and greet. "I've voted for the other party all my life," he told her, his voice a little shaky. "But when I watched you in that hearing, I saw someone standing up for what's right. Not playing politics. Just doing your job." Maybe that was the most powerful part of all. In an era where partisanship too often drowns out principle, Crockett's moment cut through. People didn't just respond to her politics, they responded to her conviction. As one national editorial summarized it, "In just 21 words, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett reminded us of something that should never be forgotten. That truth still has power, that accountability still matters, and that no title, connection, or carefully rehearsed facade can shield someone from their own contradictions." It wasn't just a political victory. It was a reaffirmation. That clarity is still possible. That calm competence still wins. And that in a world full of noise, truth, plainly spoken, is still the most powerful voice in the room.